Hey everybody, ronarray here, and Warden this league has been a very strong pick for any elemental attack build, so I decided to combine it with Smite, which has always been an amazing skill for attacks. And here it is, my Smite Warden build, which is easily all uber viable and can clear tier 17 mobs with 95% of the mods, since it is very hard to break. For example, here's a tier 17 mob with 11 mods, that's about 3 scarabs of risk. As you can see, there is no issues. The build has awesome clear, decent single target, and solves one of the main Warden problems, tankiness, since it can surely take some really big punches. We have about 100 spell suppress, 90% resistance, 4 endurance charge, instant leech and decent amount of armor and health, which make it build pretty tanky. Smite Warden also utilizes some complex mechanics that could be hard to navigate. So I will explain all of them in detail, pointing out what items to get and how to proceed. So check the timestamps for particular questions and let's go. So how the build works? We rely heavily on double tinctures from experienced herbalist node, which are completely broken in this league, to receive crazy amount of crit chance, up to 47% from one of them, and raise our attack speed as well, receiving about 38% from the second tincture. And two of them together can easily quadruple our DPS. With all of that damage and attack speed, we can use Celestial Braces to rise attack speed even more and receive about 29 to 30 stacks of consistent fortify with a lot of quality of life, because we just need to hit monsters. And with all of that fortify we will be able to face tank some of the bigger hits. Next step is Relicash, which will provide a consistent source of all charges at the same time, and will give us whopping 50% of HP pool and 70% of DPS at all times, since we don't need conditions to stack our charges, and also those charges cannot be stolen from us, so we're not really afraid of many bad mods. And the last part is Doryani's prototype, as a body armor to help both our DPS and survivability. Doryani will make our damage significantly higher, since all nearby enemies will have a similar lightning resistance to our character, and we can have up to minus 200% of lightning resistance, which is absolutely awesome and better than many cases of penetration. Even if you will be unable to reach 200% and will just stop at like 160 or 150%, it's still going to be very good. So since we are using Doryani's prototype, we will not have any kind of lightning resistance, and our lightning resistance is going to be in minus. So how we are mitigating downsides of such situation? First off, we are using Dawnbreaker's Shield. Dawnbreaker's Shield is like very cool and will receive up to 20% of cold damage, lightning damage and physical damage as fire damage. That's a huge boost to our survivability. It also provides a lot of armor, which stacks with Doryani bonus. After that, we are pretty much using Watcher's Eye, which is giving us 20% of cold and lightning damage taken as fire while we are affected by Purity of Fire. So that's 40% already for cold and lightning damage. And the last part is pretty much Little Pride. We are going to receive Tempered by War here. It will give us 50% of cold and lightning damage taken as fire damage. It's going to rise 90% of cold and lightning damage taken as fire, together with Dawnbreaker and Watcher's Eye. Unfortunately, Tempered by War is not that good for damage, since our lightning resistance is pretty much in minus already. Getting 50% less lightning resistance is actually going to improve our lightning resistance instead of granting our more minus. And if you will get rid of Tempered by War, as you can see, my lightning resistance drops to minus 200%, which is a cap. So for damage, Tempered by War is not that good, but it's providing enough survivability to pretty much worth it. So based on the situation, there is a big question. Is build afraid of lightning damage over time? Because most of the Doryani's builds are kinda afraid of it. But since we are using the combination of Dawnbreaker and Tempered by War, all lightning and cold damage is taken as fire, including damage over time. Moving forward, a very important question is how to reach 50 stacks of shock. Based on our attack speed and with everything that we are doing, we will have Oath of Spring, which will give us a chance to reach 50 stacks on shock on each enemy. and that's a pretty hard number to reach. So there's a cool trick how we can make it much easier for ourselves to reach at least 40 or 45 for builds with lower attack speed and up to 50 for builds with higher attack speed. So we need to anoint a very important node called static blows, because static blows is going to give us 50% increased duration of lightning ailments, and it's going to literally give us 50% of shock duration, and it will be much easier to stack shock that way. So I recommend to anoint static blows in almost all build situations because it's going to provide a lot of quality of life and damage by itself. You also receive like increased damage if you have shocked an enemy recently, but it's not that important. So another very important question is how to reach 90% of fire resistance. Since we are receiving almost all damage as fire, we just need to stack maximum fire resistance as high as possible. So the first step is pretty much to use Purity of Fire, which is, well, very much basic. And the rest will come from jewels, because right now you can roll plus 2% of maximum fire resistance on all the jewels. So perfectly you need to combine it with health, maybe some attack speed or critical strike multiplier, and stack plus 2 maximum fire resistance on all the jewels until you hit 90% of fire resistance. So what about mana management of the build? Because mana been a big problem for many melee builds in that league. So generally right now in game my mana cost is about 3 mana per strike. I don't think it's an issue in any form because you're going to receive much more mana overall. I have only 14 mana and we just don't even need more because the rest of the skills will cost 0 or will be based on life tap. So can the build just do cannot leech? Well, to be honest, yes, there's no big issue like that, or like less recovery of mana, because we currently have Thrill of Battle, which reads like gain 2 mana per enemy hits with attacks. Gain is not really blocked by cannot leech, therefore we are still going to receive some mana when we are hitting enemies, and it's probably going to make our build absolutely playable in all cannot leech maps. Even if leeching life could be a little harder, it's still possible to do that. We're also receiving a little more mana per life and mana on hit node, which will give us 2 more mana. And all of that together are going to fix our mana issues in all situations just fine. So to reach such mana numbers, you will pretty much need to use Inspiration in your setup, and you will need to reach at least 12 or 13 mana cost on one of your rings. You can also use 2 normal rings with minus mana, but always keep in mind that your skill should cost at least 1 mana if you are using Inspiration. Otherwise, if it's going to cost 0, you are not going to receive any buff from Inspiration, so it's pretty important. So talking about Chaos Resistance, we don't have a lot of space to pretty much stack it because we are using a lot of units. But currently we still can use one item that can help us heavily with capping it. It's pretty much Light of Minion. And if it's even less effective than a Gladiator, you can still use it to get a significant boost of Chaos Resistance. So just put it to the left part and all of the nodes around are going to provide you with additional bonuses. It can help you to move roughly from like minus 30 to at least plus 41, plus 50. And if you're going to use a flask or if you're going to use a different belt, you're going to be capped. Another interesting question is pretty much immunities. Since we don't have an approach for rolling immunities on our items, we pretty much need to get it elsewhere. And I think right now shock immunity is very important for the build. Freeze immunity as well. So to get freeze immunity we just need Soul of Brine King. It gives us 100% chance to avoid being frozen, and that's pretty much worth it. It's also going to help with stuns if we are getting stunned. From time to time it happens. And to get immunity to shock, we will need to take Charge Mastery. Cannot be shocked without maximum power charges. Since we are going to use a Relic Ash, we also always consider to be on maximum power charges, and we can take that mastery and avoid shock with just simple 1 point, so it's definitely recommended. So another important question for us, it's pretty much reduction of the critical strike damage. because in current game, reaching at least like 70 to 80% of reduction of critical strikes damage is very important to survive better. And if you can be capped, it will be even better. So currently we're all critical strike damage reduction on Watcher's Eye. So you can reach like 46% of reduced extra damage from critical strikes, while affected by determination. You can go for higher numbers like 60, but I currently rolled not the perfect one, so it's 46. And you can also take a mastery, critical mastery. You take 30% reduced extra damage from critical strikes, which is absolutely amazing, to be honest. So the last part is pretty much coming from the Dawnbreaker Corruption. If you can get a Dawnbreaker Corruption, I definitely recommend it. You need at least like 24% reduced extra damage from critical strikes. But if you will roll a better Watcher's Eye, you could avoid getting Corruption and Dawnbreaker. And if you can get a Watcher's Eye, you can just get Dawnbreaker itself. So the only thing that I definitely would say that you need to always take is pretty much critical strike mastery. The rest is up to you, but if you have funds enough to afford it, I 100% recommend that. So it's also very important to mention how we are keeping our Tincture uptime. We have a cool buff Tincture mastery. The first 6 mana burn applied to you have no effect. So when you're clicking the Tincture first time, you will not receive any mana burn. After that, you will be able to stack some mana burn on you and Tinctures will go off. When they will go off, you will have an Endurance Suffusion with Tincture effect linger on you per second per mana burn on you. So that's a very good option because you're going to receive 6 seconds of lingering. After that, you will need to reuse your Tinctures and pretty much repeat the whole process again. So you will need to reuse your Tinctures on average like every 15 seconds approximately. Keep that in mind, especially while you are farming harder maps, because it's very important and it's going to give you most part of your damage. So another very important question is how to improve movement speed. Since we are using Relic Cache boots, we don't have an easy access to 30% from boots. And it's making the character, well, a little slow. So to fix that, there's a few cool tricks. First off, taking quick step helps a lot. So 6% from the main node and about 6 from the small ones will give us about 12% overall. And the next step is pretty much getting a cluster jewel with Advanced Guard. Advanced Guard is going to give us ignore all movement penalties from armor and 5% increased movement speed while holding a shell. It's going to provide about 13% increased movement speed. And together with the quick step, we are going to receive about 25% of movement speed, which could be completely compensated based on boots. So for build to feel great, please don't forget about both of those options. And if you still feel slow, you can pretty much just use a Quicksilver Flask instead of the granite. So can the smite hit twice? Well, there's a clarification from GGG about the smite gem, where they pretty much talk about smite behavior. It's been like a few years ago, and currently, yes, smite can hit twice. It's pretty much well known. It's not going to be fixed pretty soon based on the GGG statement. So currently, for smite to hit twice, you need to hit a zone close to the boss but not the boss itself. And pretty much your clone is going to hit the boss as well. You're getting the clone from Attack Mastery with non-Vaal strike skills target one additional nearby enemy. So that way, one of the part of the ability will hit with melee hit and second will hit with lightning. So another important question, why I'm not calculating the damage in PoE for double hits? Well, I think that such situations happens not that consistently, and pretty often you can't hit properly to pretty much ensure that you are going to receive the bonus. So I think it would be a little unfair to calculate it that way, and I pretty much just keep basic hit DPS for it, which is in my opinion is pretty much enough. However, smite can hit twice if you are doing everything properly, and you can keep that in mind. So another interesting question is why I'm not really capping cold resistance. As you can see, I have only about 39% of cold resistance in my build, and I'm currently not capping it. It's mostly because Cold max hit is already higher than Lightning max hit. So if I'm going to die because of some damage, it's probably going to be Lightning anyway. And we also transfer most of the damage to fire anyway. So I feel completely comfortable with such amount of cold resistance, and fitting more into the build is not really necessary. So talking about our rage situations. Currently, right now, they're getting rage from our cluster jewel. Bloodsand is giving us gain 2 range on hit with axes and swords. Unfortunately, Path of Building can't properly calculate rage. And it leads us to a situation where I needed to add rage to weapon 1 socket link with shell charge, just because it's the only way how PoE can properly understand that we have rage. So we don't actually use rage with shell charge. It's just here for calculation. I added that in the comments, so like movement skill, rage comes from cluster, here for calc. That's pretty much it. But the main source, it's here and it's Bloodsand. So right now there's only one mode that it's very hard for us to do. It's pretty much reduced effect of your auras, because it's going to completely decimate our fire resistance, because we are using our purity of fire to pretty much get fire resistance for the build. So it's probably a very bad mod. You can still try to run it, but you're probably going to die in those maps a lot of times, because you'll be out of resistance completely. And every big hit is going to kill you because all the damage will be transitioned to fire. Another very bad mode is pretty much reduced action speed. It's still doable, but it's going to be much slower. And the last part is pretty much monsters are blocking your attacks. So in that case, if you're encountering monsters are blocking your attacks from Scarp or Risk, for example, you need to repick Attack Mastery. From non-Vaal strike skill, target one additional nearby enemy, which is very important. To pretty much, monster cannot block your attack. After you finish that map, please repeat it back, but just changing that mastery for 1 point should help you in such situation. So another pretty common issue is pretty much low intelligence of the build. Usually we roll a lot of intelligence on one of the rings, so if you can get like up to 100, that would be very good. However, if you're playing like a middle budget version, for example, you will need to roll very small amount of intelligence on one ring and small amount of intelligence on another. After that, it's also recommended to pick 1 point here for Thiefcraft, because it's going to give you 30 intelligence. All of that combined is going to help you to pretty much reach your required intelligence and use most of the abilities just fine. But if it's still not enough, there's another option. You could also take Primal Spirit for 2 points. It's not the best option, but it's going to provide 20 more intelligence and should be worth it in the most cases. So if you're still not capped and don't have enough intelligence to use Wrath, just go for Primal Spirit too. So another great question pretty much is Avatar of the Wilds, which graph on us Unbound worth it? So generally with the Smite build, we're not really stacking Avatar of the Wilds that often. So at most of the bosses we are going to be without it. That's why in PoE I'm not calculating Unbound Avatar at all. It could give us a lot of damage, but I'm not calculating it because in the most cases we will not have it. So if you feel like you don't have it often, I recommend to just get rid of it and take Evasion and Tincture effect twice. It's going to give you about 4% of additional damage, up to 6% based on your build setup. But you can still use Avatar of the Wilds in some particular conditions, especially in like tier 17s. So if you feel like it's worth it for you, you can pretty much keep it. So half of the time I played with Avatar, and another half I played with passives for Tincture effect. Both of those approaches are working perfectly fine if everything else stays the same. So what kind of items you will absolutely need to kickstart the build? So first off is Dawnbreaker. It's very important because it's going to help us with damage mitigation. Second part is Doryani prototype. After that you can get Relic Cache and the Celestial Brace for Fortify. And next step is pretty much getting Little Pride for Tempered by War. And the last step is Watcher's Eye. All of that together is very important for your survivability mostly. but it's going to help you with damage as well. If you just have those items, you can pretty much start, but most of the time you will need all of them. Maybe you can try to play it without like Watcher's Eye, but survivability is going to heavily suffer, so be very careful with that. So talking about our items, everything is pretty simple. For Celestial Brace, I recommend to get a Corruption with +1 maximum Frenzy Charge if it's possible, and otherwise you can just take 10 maximum Fortification. For Relic Cache, you can get +1 maximum Endurance Charge as a Corruption, but if it's expensive, just go with basic Relic Cache. The same goes for Headhunter, the best corruptions like Critical Strike Multiplier and one of the Aura effects, but normal Headhunter is working just fine. So, for your weapon, you will need lightning damage, some attack speed, multiplier, and hits can be evaded. That's pretty much everything that you might need, so don't worry if you will miss some stat on that. Talking about the shield, you can get 20% of everything taken as fire for survivability, and if you can add corruption with a reduced critical strike damage. Doryani's prototype should be very cheap, especially a basic version, so you can look into corruption. I recommend to get at least one socketed AoE gem, socketed aura, or socketed duration. All of them are working pretty much good, and if you can get two, it will be even better. For the rings, you need to aim for non-challenge skills has minus mana cost, but it could be very expensive. So in that case, just drop it completely, take minus lightning resistance, intelligence, and life. That way, just roll your second ring with minus mana. However, if you have minus mana at 1, you can pretty much roll the second with minus lightning resistance again. And for the amulet, aim for global critical strike multiplier, some life, and minus lightning resistance. That's pretty much it for the items. The most important part is Tincture, so make sure you roll them perfectly. You will need at least 40% like melee weapon attack speed together with elemental damage with melee weapons. And at the second Tincture, roll critical strike chance, and melee weapon damage penetrates 26% elemental resistances. So as a last touch, you can add Progenesis to the build if you want, but if you don't have funds for it, you can just go with normal Basalt Flask instead. So overview of the three is pretty simple as well. We are taking Tincture effect everywhere where we can do that. I'm also taking two clusters, so one with Martial Pulse and Advanced Guard, and one goes for Blast and for Rage and Devastator, because it's going to help with the clear, even if clear is already good. So we're placing the Light of Minion here, and pretty much it's helping with Chaos Resistance significantly. I also recommend to take Shield Master because it's giving a lot of DPS, and one passive here helps us with armor because we already have some endurance charges. The most important part is to take non-Vaal strike target one additional enemy, and you can take it here just fine. Also, you can add a lot of spell suppression tattoos, so if you don't have spell suppression cap, you will need to take chance to suppress spell damage is lucky. And that's pretty much it. Otherwise, the three should be pretty self-explanatory. I'm also going for instant Leech because it feels very good on many maps, so try to take it if it's possible. Also, in the PoE, I don't have loadout options up here, so there's middle budget and low budget version. Low budget version is not really that cheap, but look into it if you don't have enough funds for higher versions. So that's been my Smite Warden build. Check out different budget versions, and thank you very much for watching. If you will still have questions, feel free to hit me on Twitch. I will leave the link in the pinned comment. See you next time. ronarray out.